thing from yours? Is that what that fuzzy
The
is?
whirring? No,
Yeah.
that's from the speakers.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I know it's a little bit off.
Okay, cool.
It just sounds like a little fan over there.
I should just turn this light off. Can I turn the light off so it's not quite so, like,
Perfect.
there we go, it's a little better. In every Zoom meeting I'm ever in with Dave Campbell, all you can see is his forehead.
He's obviously decided that's the best.
There we go, there we go. All I ever see is like, you remember that, what was it? It was that television show where they had the guy on the other side of the fence and all you saw was his head.
Oh, yeah. It was,
Do you remember what that was?
Home improvement.
Home improvement, that's every time I'm in a Zoom call with you, Dave, that's what I think
Yeah.
about.
No, it wasn't me. Well, that's right, yeah. Nice work.
Well, let's hope that they join us because they're kind of important, but maybe we can, Nick, can we record this?
We can record it, yeah.
Yeah, let's record it and then, so thank you very much for joining us. We have a working group, you guys saw who's on the working group. What we were trying to do, and I think Christy was gonna join us also.
Just need you to give me permission.
Oh, I do, okay, I can push record on mine. Let's see here, hold on. Give us a little bit more time. Sorry, Dave, you get me up close and personal here on this.
Sure, your nose is clean. No, I'm kidding.
I know. Please ask host to give you permission. How come I'm not the host? That's weird. Who's the host? Oh, you know what it is? It's because I'm in as Liz. Oh, well, we won't. Okay. Hi, Rick. Happy
Hello,
to
how are
join
you?
us.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Okay, well,
Dave, I don't think I will not make fun of your forehead. I promise.
Well, we have a couple of people that are still to join us, but I'll go ahead and kind of get started. So I think as I explained to a couple of you on the phone, I had a love-hate relationship with the ranking system since I started racing in 2001. And my hate relationship is, I don't understand how they're calculated. And I don't understand, and it was particularly frustrating for me when I was trying to qualify for the world team in cross. And I was doing all these Xterra races and I was coming in like second place and I couldn't understand why I wasn't moving up in the rankings. Like I didn't, and there was like not a lot of women in my age group. Like I'm old, so, you know, I usually don't have a lot of competition, but I couldn't understand why that was happening. So when I was at Ironman, Andrew Messick came into my office one day and he said, you know, Kolar, I want a ranking system and I want you to figure it out. And so we developed a very, I did the exact opposite of what USAT Triathlon had because I didn't understand it anyway. We developed probably a way too simplified system, but it was really sort of designed to be initially designed as more of a loyalty program. But as time went on, it became more competitive as benefits were being offered and things like that to the Ironman athletes. So it kind of met what we wanted it to do, but it's too simplified, right? So when Nick came back to join us after being gone for, 6 months or something, and he was the ranking expert, we were sort of brainstorming in my office and I said, there's gotta be a way that we can simplify our ranking system. Because I know from my experience at Ironman that the ranking system was a great marketing tool. Like it was a terrific way to get people racing. It was a terrific way to get people engaged in the sport. And it was because it was simple. Like we could explain how you were ranked, how you generated points in 2 sentences in a trade show booth and expo. And that was the goal, right? I'm not thinking that we can be quite that simplified here because it's a little bit more complex. Obviously, there's more than just 2 distances. There's a lot more race formats. There's a lot of constituent groups that are affected by the ranking system. But I do think there's an opportunity for us to at least evaluate an alternative. So basically where we are here is we're not saying we're going to throw out the existing ranking system and with the backwater, and there are aspects of it that are really great. And it may be that this group comes to a conclusion at the end of this exercise that the existing system is fine. And we just need to rethink how we market it and how we engage our community. But in the interim, I want to see if there's a more simplified system. Because when Nick and I talk about objectives of the ranking system, the existing system is not checking the boxes that we need it to check. And so the purpose of this group is not to sort of rehash our existing system. We will get there ultimately, once we sort of think if there's a more simplified approach to this. The goal of this group is to sort of, let's identify what we want the ranking system to do for us, for the community of triathlon, not just USA Triathlon. We don't have a lot of skin in the game on this one. It's really more about supporting our constituent groups. And in USA Triathlon speak, our constituents are basically 4 groups. They are coaches, they're clubs, they're athletes, and they're race directors, which are all the people that are on this call, except we're missing our timer and we're missing our race director, but I'm hoping that Sean Ryan's always late. So we hope that he's, so what I want us to be able to do in these series of meetings is first and foremost, let's talk about the goals and objectives of what a ranking system could do. Like in a perfect world, if the ranking system did not exist, what would we hope it to accomplish? How do we grow the sport with it? How do we bring more athletes in? How do we engage a broader community of athletes in our ranking system? Like right now, it probably touches the top 15 to 20% of our athletes, and everybody else doesn't care about it because they feel like it doesn't matter to them because they're not going to podium or they're not going to be an All-American or whatever. So we need to sort of think about that. So that's kind of what our objective is. I thought maybe before we get started, let's kind of go around the room and you guys introduce yourselves. I think we've done a pretty good job at, once we get our timer and our race director, kind of covering all the constituent groups. So I don't know, Justin, do you want to start?
Sure, it's the second time today I've been thrown under the bus first. I'm just a level 3 coach. I have been in the States now for 13 years. Originally grew up in New Zealand, worked for a New Zealand Tri, did some work for USA Tri, the development manager for a while. Now I run an elite team here in Colorado Springs and have athletes spread all over the country who range from beginners right through to world-class elites.
Right. Jennifer?
I'm a level 2. I've been a coach for 8 years, and I have a pretty small club, but it's internationally membered, I guess, is the way to say it. Mostly age group, and I would say about 75% of my group is long course athletes, and then I have about 25% that specialize in short course.
Great. Great. I'm Liz Kolar. I'm the Director of Constituent Relationships, which is this incredibly long-winded and fancy name for basically I oversee our service to all of our constituent groups. Rick?
I'm Rick Boland. I'm an athlete. For real, I work in software. I've been competing in triathlon for 6 or 7 years. I came from marathon running, and I wasted my youth racing bicycles after high school before I went to college.
So Rick also has experience in developing ranking systems because you built one for tennis.
I did.
Yeah, so we're hoping that he can bring some fresh ideas for how to do this. Dave? Yeah, I think what Dave makes an interesting point. That's one of our challenges is how do we also drive interest in the different formats? Because we have been seeing statistically that particularly older athletes are moving into aquabike, no shock there, but we're seeing more and more athletes moving into these different formats, and it's a way to bring more people into the sport. So we need to sort of include that in our ranking system too, in a more robust fashion than we're doing currently. Sam?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sam. I've been with USAT for 13 years. well, just about 13 years. And I've worked on everything from rankings to membership to sanctioning. I am now doing the IT for USAT. I'm working with our external groups on that. Rankings is something that I've been involved with since 2009. So it's long history with it, and I'm excited to see where we can go with this.
Great. So the other members who are not on here, who are also part of this committee, and maybe we just got our time zones mixed up because they did confirm. We have AJ with Sports Stats. Sports Stats does our timing, but one of the things that AJ and I have talked about, just sort of casually, is, you know, if we can come up with a more simplified system, which is one of the things we need to solve for, I can build a timing system that can be given to all the race directors, where basically at the end of the race, they push a button and it automatically transports all the points directly to our ranking system, which would be amazing.
Yeah.
Because right now, Nick's world is, oh, and Nick, go ahead, I'm sorry, I
No,
completely
you're
forgot about you.
Yeah, so I've actually worked with USA Triathlon in a variety of capacities for the last 3.5 years. I did take a step away about a year ago during the pandemic. But luckily enough, I was able to speak with Liz and then Sam, and then was fortunate enough to be able to come back. At this time, I am a constituent relationship coordinator, but I have worked in membership and service in a variety of capacities, as I mentioned, and then I have overseen kind of the rankings program. Sam basically taught me everything I know, and I've just expanded on a lot of what she's already given me, but I've been doing it for probably about 3.5 years now. So very, very much interested into seeing, kind of to just add to what Liz has mentioned, but I think we have a lot of opportunities to really engage our athletes in a different way, because the rankings program has, to Dave's point, it has worked and it has awarded athletes in a certain sense exactly basically for them to be able to be a part of the world championships and to be an All-American, et cetera, et cetera. But we want to expand to a pool of athletes that are just beyond that. We want to expand to athletes that may not be as competitive as others. So we just think there's a really good opportunity to, one, not only simplify the program, but to enhance the program, to really bring in all of the constituents together, because we want to be able to promote coaches, race directors, all in one, all encompassing, where they can promote that to the athletes and the athletes feel like they're being rewarded with the ranking system. So it's not just appealing to a small group of individuals, which has typically been individuals who are either All-American or they find themselves trying to qualify for the world championships through the ranking system. So we just feel like there's a lot of opportunity. So we just want to get everybody's perspective on what it is now, what are some of the latent needs, and how we can really just dive into it and see what everybody's thoughts are.
Yeah, exactly. So we have Nick, who comes with a tremendous amount of experience. We have AJ from a timing standpoint. Sean Ryan, who is going to join us, he's a race director, but he, one of the things, and we'll talk a little bit about when we get to the constituent groups, the rankings are really not being leveraged by our race directors, and they're not being used as a key selling point for doing a sanctioned event. So Sean is also on there, and then Christy, who runs a junior club, is also part of our group. And we currently do not rank juniors for a number of reasons. We just didn't want to be the soccer moms and have these poor kids getting a lot of pressure and not enjoying the sport. But there is an opportunity for us to acknowledge participation and things like that from juniors. So that's why we wanted to have Christy involved in this, and I may just have to like meet with them separately. And so let's talk
Liz, sorry, this is Christy. I'm
Christy,
here.
hi, we didn't see you. Okay, great. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Christy Lausch. I'm in Maryland. I've been a triathlete for about 23, 24 years. I've been a coach for about 11. I've only coached youth and junior athletes. My husband's a USA Triathlon race director. And, you know, my focus is on junior elites and youth elites. And I would just kind of put an asterisk next to juniors not being ranked. Juniors are actually ranked within the junior elite series. And those rankings are used for team selections with USAT high performance. So it's a kind of a separate system that has its own ranking process. But we definitely at USA Triathlon does not rank like youth athletes who are racing like youth focused distance events.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That's true. Yep. And so I guess we don't have AJ, so we do, but we have to do it Christie, so that's good, okay. So what we wanted to talk about, let me sort of give you the way that we see our community, and then maybe we can go by constituent group down in terms of what we would hope to achieve. The other thing I want to mention as part of our kind of Nick and our wish list, so he's spending an inordinate amount of time. I mean, 98% of his time is spent taking results files, putting them in the proper format, uploading them to our ranking system. It is total waste of this talented young man's time. And so personally, from my objectives, overarching objectives, I want to simplify it so we can save some time. So let's look at what the goals of a system should be before we get to the constituent groups. So just to sort of like lead this off, and then I'm going to let you guys go. I mean, obviously it needs to be fair, right? Fair. What else?
Attractive to everybody.
Okay, inclusive. Okay.
What is meant by inclusive? Sorry.
Attractive to all constituents, like
Thank you.
regardless of how you're regardless of how, you know, good you are.
Thanks.
I think it needs to be able to support our race director community and become a key selling point. It also needs to be automated or simplified, right, in a way that makes sense. Right. What else?
I think in order to support the race directors, it has to support the clubs as well, because the clubs are
Yep.
essentially going to be the ones who drive athletes into those races.
Yep, support the clubs.
I
That's a
think
good
it needs to be transparent and visible.
good. Transparent. Okay,
How about motivational?
motivational. Love that. How about what?
Timely.
Timely, yes.
Can we put accurate just in front of timely though?
But you don't think it's accurate? Okay. Timely and
Erase
accurate.
it out, but yeah.
Okay. I think we need to be able to use it to grow the sport, meaning that it should be a tool to get people excited about racing, right? And excited to race, not that it's all about USA Triathlon and our sanctioned events, but I think our sanctioned events are great. And we want athletes to race in sanctioned events. We don't want them racing in non-sanctioned events for a couple of reasons. First off, the insurance is not as good. Something happens, it's bad. They don't have molestation coverage generally as part of their insurance, and they don't require safe sport for race directors. We require safe sport for our race directors, for our clubs that have any kind of dealing with juniors, for our coaches. It's, you know, background check and safe sport, it's done. So we want to create a safe, fair environment, so we want to bring people to our events. So it should drive participation.
And I think to add to your point, Liz, with participation, I think one of the biggest things with the sport is that so much of the reason why people do and compete in the sport, and maybe not necessarily compete, but why they actually participate, is because of the accomplishment. If somehow the system can reward those accomplishments, and then I think it helps them stay within the sport. Because a lot of times you can consider it to be a bucket list item, but if you somehow use the rankings program as leverage, if you somehow use that engagement as leverage, then I think it brings them back, because they are accomplished in completing the event, but it helps them come back.
Yeah.
And it helps them seek out coaches, and it helps them seek out additional races and resources that we do have available, but we're not always able to leverage for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good thing.
I agree. I think it's kind of attached together, right? We want to reward performance because that's what a ranking system does, and recognize the best of our country. But we also want to give people a sense of accomplishment. I like that.
Well, and performance doesn't necessarily have to mean the top of the pile. It
Right.
can also mean relative to yourself. So in a ranking system that was consistent year in, year out, so an athlete could see how they were progressing each year, would give them a reason to come back every season to see, okay.
Progression.
I was here last year, and this is where I am at this point, so this year, and so they can see that progression over time.
Yeah.
I think there also needs to, it needs to be balanced between those disciplines. Like you said, we support a lot of different racing formats, and you don't want to see it stacked in favor of, say, 7.3 or long distance or short course, because at the moment there seems to be sometimes where the races, some of the shorter races seem to pull more points than some of the longer races, and yet you can't race as many longer races. It's like just finding that balance between the disciplines.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, having been an Ironman athlete for years and years, I can tell you a sprint triathlon is much harder.
Thank you.
It hurts a lot more. Now, no one's usually holding my hair at the end of the porta potty because I throw up in the porta potty, but it is equally as difficult. Anything else that we want to add to sort of our goals list?
The terms that I would assign to that explanation we were given is visible and social. When we're talking, if we're trying to find like singular words that capture kind of what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, I would love to be able to have a ranking system where you could download where you are at any given time and promote it on social. Like I am #1 in my small town.
You can sort of do that, but it's not very visible.
It's not very visible, and then you have to screenshot it and do a bunch of other things, but it would be really fun to be able to ultimately, Sam is like having heart failure because we're talking about IT stuff, but it would be really fun to be able to download a badge that says, this week I'm now #1 in Poughkeepsie in my age group, and I mean, that kind of stuff is fun to share that. I agree, it's sort of like a Strava model with all the challenges and stuff, just kind of doing something more.
We were handing out Zwift kit, digital outfits for people in for their avatars that said that they were ranked in the top 100 of their age group or generally across the United States or in their state. People would probably take advantage of that because people love lists. Everyone loves a list.
Yeah,
and especially if it's something you can't buy, you have to earn.
You have to earn, yeah.
But,
And it could be that could be part of this participation, because I kind of think that this system needs to have 2 pillars to rest on. One is to acknowledge and reward performance, without question. Like the All-American program, we have done not enough to promote what that is, and we have not enough, in my view, at least in recent years, in promoting those All-Americans and what they bring to the sport. But then they're no different than, look at Dave, Dave's an All-American, so pretend you're not Dave, but Dave does 20 races a year. So, let's say Dave was a back of the packer, which he's not, but let's just hypothetically say you are. He should be rewarded for the fact that he's out there doing 20 races a year. So I think we need to look at those 2 pillars as well. So we've got a pretty big wish list here, right? Yeah? Yeah, I agree, Dave, that we haven't done a good job at talking about rankings. What I don't want to do in this discussion, though, is talk about what the rankings get you right now. I think we can get to that. Let's hold that, though. Let's hold that thought about Team USA and qualification for Team USA to like one of our other meetings. Right now, I just want to really just kind of focus on whether or not there's anything else that we need to add from a goals or objectives standpoint for the rankings. Sam, you're really quiet. Do you have anything?
I was just taking in what everybody was saying here and thinking from a technical standpoint, you know, we are going to have to, if we're going to automate this, it has to be really easy and it has to work for both people who are technically savvy and those who are not. We have some race directors who don't even use a timer. They basically still are either using stopwatches or they may have timing mats, but it's meant to be kind of a low budget, whether they're doing it for charity or anything. So it's got to be technologically easy to implement or to provide the information.
Yep,
It's
I was gonna say, I mean, for those who have timing ability, then that would be great. But for those who don't, I mean, if we had a template that they could supply that was based, that we provided, that was a CSV file from just like Excel, that they could input and then send through or upload, that automatically populated, I think that would work.
exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of have that now. The problem is they send in so many different formats. they
Well,
don't-
that's why you have to have.
That's why you
Just
create.
Excel.
Yeah, you create the platform and say.
Yeah, and say, this is what
fill in
you're
the
gonna
boxes
use.
and then we'll
Yeah.
go.
Exactly.
And if it doesn't, like if it's not gonna upload, you can always have it rejected back to the next
Right.
why.
Okay, good.
And I'm not piling on Dave's comment. I promise, Liz. I heard you say, let's leave that for later. But he motivated me or reminded me that it seems to me that part of what this ranking system should do is establish USA Triathlon's role in triathlon within the United States. And this might sound crazy for people who work every day there and collect a paycheck there every day. You might think, Matt, we are the center of the universe.
We
But
are,
As
Rick.
an athlete,
We are the
I hope
center.
you are. I hope you are. Einstein says you are, so trust me, you are. But there's other people also at the center of other universes, like Ironman. And it might be the case that a new ranking system, which is much more visible and much, that motivates athletes more to participate, would draw athletes to be reminded and coaches to be reminded of how important USA Triathlon is, and to help build the brand and to establish that you're more than just a sanctioning body. You're a group of people who care deeply about the sport and want to see triathlon within the United States be more fun, more safe, more participatory, more engaging, more excellent, and then I can throw in some silly words too. But maybe the new one of the goals for the new ranking system is to remind athletes and others that USA Triathlon is a really important part of the triathlon community.
I love that. I think that's, I mean, and again, that provides, if we can do that with this system, then we can provide value to coaches and the coaching certification. And we can provide value to our member clubs as being affiliated with USA Triathlon. And we can provide value to our race director community. Because the rankings will have that value and it will speak to it. So I love that. I think that's great.
Well, all credit goes to Dave because he reminded me and inspired me to say that.
Okay, Dave, you get a
Thank you, Dave.
point.
I would agree. I think there's been times where USAT has seen itself as competition for everyone else as opposed to an umbrella over everyone else. And I think if we take the high ground and be that umbrella over the sport rather than feeling like we're in competition with everyone,
Yeah.
I think it positions us better.
And I think that's an important nuance, because I think when we look, as I've talked to a number of you and I've talked to Tim and we've sort of talked around the office, there's this part of the challenge that we have with the rankings, and maybe this isn't an issue. Maybe we just decide as a group, this doesn't matter that much. But how do you equalize the fields, the courses? I mean, how do you take somebody who does a sprint distance triathlon in the middle of June in St. Pete at Fort DeSoto when it's 100% humidity and 98 degrees and compare that sprint triathlete to in a race that took place on the same time, in Boston, to use Nick's example, where it was like 72 degrees and it was flat, so do we need to normalize it? One of the things that have been thrown out is do we create some sort of a factoring program. I would recommend not doing that, putting the race director hat on, because we don't have a race director here, except maybe Christy can speak for her husband. But, you know, we don't want any of our smaller grassroots events to feel that they contribute less to the ranking system in any way. So like an idea was, well, a national championship brings the best of the best. You know, maybe they should get more points. One of the things that, and I'm just going to bring the Ironman example here, but we won't, and we're going to talk next week about all the different ranking systems that are out there and see what we like or what we don't like. But one of the things that we did with the Ironman system was that we had very few goals, right? Our goals were to drive participation, right? So we needed to encourage people to race more often. And we needed to make it simple, and we needed to adjust for the conditions on race day. Because Ironman Maryland, for example, 3 years ago, when the hurricane blew through and the waves were so big that people were crashing out in the swim and they were running in knee-deep water. I don't know if you guys remember those pictures of people running in knee-deep water. It's very different than Ironman Maryland, like last year, where it was a beautiful day, right? So one of the things that we need to look at in this ranking system, and this is what Tim and Sam, I probably want you to sort of, before we go into the objectives for each constituent group, you might spend a little bit of time talking about the existing ranking system just to kind of give everybody sort of an idea. But one of the things I want us to think about, and this is what Tim would like to see, is how do we want people ranked on race day with those conditions, right? So it's strength of field, it's weather, it's I don't know, strength of field, weather, elevation, you know, all of those factors. People need to generate their points at that race on that race day. Right now, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, our existing system looks at a performance the previous year, or in this last year, 2 years ago, looks at a performance of somebody called a pace setter, and points are compared against that performance the previous year. Tim wants us to move away from that if we can as part of this reboot, because it doesn't necessarily adjust for changing conditions. Snow on race day versus a beautiful day.
It's hard to plan ahead for too.
Well-
Can't think of, I'm gonna do this race because it should be good for points. You just don't know.
You just don't know, and you don't know who's going to show up, right? It's a little bit like showing up for college and everybody in your class is pretty average except that one kid that screws up the bell curve, right? And that's okay. That kid should be celebrated for screwing up the bell curve, right?
Unless he's at the bottom end.
Pardon me?
Unless he's at the bottom end.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, so Sam, why don't you sort of give us like a really quick overview in as non-technical speak as possible, so I can understand it, because I still don't understand it, what our existing ranking system is like. So when we're reimagining something, we're pulling the best of what we have.
Yeah, before I do that, do you also want me to talk about where we came from real quick? So what we were doing
Okay.
prior to this system?
Yeah, everyone's shaking their head here. Yes, that would be helpful.
Okay. So really we have two breaks in our calculations for rankings and how they were calculated. Prior to 2005, we were on what was called a factoring system. And what that did is it took in, if you did like a short try, you had a certain number of points that you could max out at. And it was based on the number of people in the event, or in the race, I should say. And it was based on the distance. And then there were other criteria that fell in for if it was a championship, if it was like our national championship versus the Kona World Championship. So it kind of added like percentages that could be earned. So for example, a short triathlon with 50 people on it had a maximum score of say like 87, which means no matter who's attending and no matter how good they did, they could never earn more than 87 points. That's what we were before 2005. In 2004, 2005, we had a meeting, and I say we, USAT, I wasn't here at that time, but the group came together and they said, no, we have to figure out a way to make it so that people can earn what they actually earn and get recognized for that. So they went to the pace setter system. And the pace setter system says, okay, we know how you generally perform because last year you were ranked, you did at least 3 races in triathlon, 2 in duathlon, or any other sport. But we can see what your average performance is. And so we pretty much know what you could do last year. Now, you may have improved over the course of the year, but that's kind of like our baseline. And what it does is it says, of these 100 people who are in the race in 2020 or 2021, how many of them raced the previous year? And let's say it was 60 of them. It says, okay, go and find those 60 people and tell me what their average performance was. And then from there, it says, of these 60 people, what was their average score? What was their time in this race? And it multiplies their average score times their time in the race. And it basically says that if they were, say, a score of 80, then they were 20% slower than somebody who would have had a score of 100. So it's going to remove 20% of their time. And it does that for all 60 people. And it gets down to what, see, and this is why Liz is like, I'm probably not even following. But
No, all pace setters are regarded, irrespective of gender, age group, all that.
correct. So it takes away that percentage of their time and then it averages that together and it says, okay, on average, the average performance of the people attending this race, this is where they would have scored if they were performing to where they should have been. And that becomes part-time. Then everybody gets compared against part-time, including those people who contributed to creating it. And so we take their score in the race divided by part-time, and it gives us their score for that race. Or sorry, their time in the race divided by part-time gives us their score in the race. So it is a lot of math, but it takes into account, because in theory, whatever conditions happened on that day were pretty consistent for that day. So if there was a lot of waves, everybody probably experienced a lot of waves. If it was super hot, everybody in that race experienced that heat. So it's trying to accommodate for that. And for people who were extremely affected by some condition, then the pace setter system will kick them out and say, you're an outlier. Something's not right. You don't belong in this pool that's contributing to the part-time. And the way it does that is, let's say you had 100 people in the race. You have 60 pace setters. Of those 60, it orders them according to their calculated time, and it kicks out the top and bottom 20% and averages the 60% of the middle. So in that sense, we're trying to get rid of those who had extremely great performances and those who had extremely poor performances. Now, the thing that is not good about the pace setter system, if you do not have a large pool of pace setters, the accuracy with which it calculates scores can sometimes seem like it's not as accurate as it should have been. I'm not saying for 100% that's the case, but if you have like a really strong performer who goes and does the race and everybody else is kind of not as strong and he's the only pace setter, everyone else's score in that race is going to look weird. So there are some challenges with the system. The more pace setters, the more accurate.
You can't escape the small number problem. So that's going to be a problem no matter what. But does the pace setter system then adjust the maximum number of points available for an event based on something? Or is it always capped at, a sprint is always going to be capped at 87?
Nope, with the pace setter system, there's no limit to the scores that you can earn.
Okay.
So from 2005 and forward, we said, well, no, it doesn't matter if you go to a small event. It doesn't matter if you are racing against, what matters is, are you racing against other strong people and did you do well against them?
Okay.
And so that's what it's trying to do. And so we have some races where an elite came in, and I know elites don't count towards the age group, but their times are still there so people can compare themselves against it. And we've had an elite come in and he earned 130 points in that race because he killed the field. He did a really great job. We have some age group athletes who are really strong who have scored up to, say, like 112 because they had a really fantastic day. Now, the other thing I will say is, and this is something that Nick does manually, is when he starts seeing those scores exceed like 100 and their pace setter score from the previous year was not that, he starts looking into it, and it helps us see if, did they cut the course? Did their time not get created correctly or calculated correctly? Was there some other reason why they are having such a highly like extreme score? And he'll look into it and he'll investigate it. But there are chances where somebody, you know, was an average performer in the previous year and they got with a coach and they worked really hard and they improved. And so this year they keep getting thrown out of the pace setters because they're far exceeding what they did the previous year. The next year when they come in, they're going to be a pace setter at the level that they were after working with a coach or working to improve themselves.
So,
Sam, you've been deeply involved in this system for a long time. If I ask you to complete the sentence, we rank athletes using this system so that we can, how would you complete that sentence?
I would complete it saying, so we can understand their athletic ability.
And why does that matter?
So I think we have to identify what we're trying to do with the ranking system. And what we have said so far is we wanted the ranking system to be a comparative tool. How am I doing against somebody else? How am I doing within my age group? How am I doing within my state? It's a comparative tool.
Okay.
That's how we
There's
had
no
established.
wrong answer. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yep.
ask. Yeah, there's no wrong
No. I appreciate that. It's one of those things. It's like, well, why are you ranking somebody? And up till now, we have said that the rankings is a way for you to compare yourself against other people in your age group, or maybe your friends, other people that are important to you. Or maybe you're chasing an elite spot and you want to know what it's going to take to become an elite member. The ranking system should be able to help you gauge your athletic ability compared to other elites.
Yeah, and to Sam's point, I think one of the things that we talked about, especially with the goals, is how do we reward the accomplishment? Because a lot of athletes will not compare themselves to the elite level athletes. As we talked about earlier, a lot of these athletes are just comparing themselves to themselves year by year, or they're going to compare themselves in their age group, or their state, or their city. So it's how do we improve upon those metrics where we're not just rewarding athletes who are the highest tier. It's not saying we're completely forgetting about these athletes. These athletes are recognized, they should be recognized more. But how do we really improve upon recognizing all athletes for all of their accomplishments in the fairest way possible without getting so complex to the point where it's very difficult to explain the system? Because Sam and I know the system well, because we've had to break it down numerous times, and I can break down a race in an Excel document and show the calculations and give everything that is necessary, but it isn't transparent. You can't, as you mentioned, plan for a race, because you can say, I can go to a race and I can do my best ever, but how would that really reflect? And you don't know. So people that try to travel for races, they don't always get that. And we'll talk about this more, especially as we get into some of the later meetings, and we can look at the calculations and kind of break down some of the barriers that we see. But I think the greatest point is we need to use the ranking system to engage every single person, and that includes coaches, that includes race directors, so that they can use that as a platform and a catalyst to really be involved with the sport. It's not just looking at it from the perspective of we need to reward 2 world championship spots to whoever earned them if they didn't do it through a national championship race. I think it goes beyond that. But again, it's rewarding those who need to be rewarded for those accomplishments. But it's looking at the other 90+% of athletes that have no idea what the rankings is, and how do we just make it worthwhile for every single person?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's a big challenge, right? I mean, I so appreciate the complexity that was built into the existing system. And it may be that what we land on as part of this group, and I know we're coming up on an hour and 15 minutes, but it may be that what we decide is, hey, the existing system is fine. Let's just invest in different ways to leverage it. Like because I'm also overseeing our club program, I want to somehow feather whatever the ranking system is into a club ranking program. And whether it's ranking the best clubs in the country, or it's just assigning points to clubs that they can then use at the end of the year to redeem for a banner, or, junior memberships, or, free, whatever that is. And I'm hoping you guys will help us sort of figure out what those things should be too. But whatever we build, it needs to be able to flow through to our other constituent groups. So like when
sorry,
Liz.
I was just going to say, what we were talking about is what was the ranking system meant to do for us, and like what was our approach on it. And Tim actually was part of hi Tim, welcome to the group. Tim was actually part of the group that worked on this in 2005, 4 or 5. And Tim, just so you know, Rick had asked the question of like, what was the system intended to do? Paraphrasing there, Rick, sorry. But, and I had stated that really we looked at the ranking system as a comparative tool and a way to judge someone's athletic ability. And he said, well, why do you want to do this? And it's basically, that's the approach, and that's how I understood it. If you have a different stance on it, I just wanted to.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on that, Tim, before you say anything. It may be that the goals of our system have changed, right? I mean, it may have been that the ranking system, when it was first envisioned, that's exactly what it wanted to do. It's designed to be a comparative tool. Now we need to look at whether or not it makes sense to have the purpose of this system be something broader. The sport has changed. The athletes have changed. The quality of their training has changed. The science behind performance has changed. Everything has changed. And do we need to innovate this program along with that? Like I know, Rick, where you're kind of going from, like, how do we gamify it in a way that kind of brings it more to where, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but listening to your questions, it seems like, how do we make it fun? How do we make it fun? So every Tuesday, and we know we get the results in right away. So every Tuesday you can go in and you can like play with your points, and what does that mean? So anyway, Tim, did you want to say something?
Part of the reason why something like Strava has been so popular is just because of the fact that you can compare yourself to other 45-year-olds, or you can compare yourself to other people who weigh more than a certain amount, or it's a comparative tool that you can play with. Like I just play with it until I get a ranking that puts me up nice and high. But I mean, you can have that simplicity to be able to do that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be simplistic behind the scenes, but it has to be simplistic in front so people can use it and understand what they see.
Exactly, and the whole idea of a challenge, right, in Strava, I mean, that for me is more fun than anything. I mean, give me a monthly challenge that tells me to go out and, ride a certain number of miles or whatever. So, I mean, does this, and maybe this is the participation portion, the participation pillar of this, because I don't want to get away from recognizing performance and our All-American program, because I think our All-Americans are badass and we should continue to celebrate them for their badassery, if that is such a word. But I also, because I'm not badass, I want to, if I go out and do 20 races like Dave Campbell, I want to be recognized for that.
How about 3? I'm not American, and I did it 3.
So
There you go. Yeah, but you're who you are, Jennifer. I'm telling you right now, I did a 100-mile gravel race without training and spent the entire afternoon when I was done throwing up. So
here's a little bit, and I'll do this quickly because I know you guys are down to 11 minutes, but In 1993, Mark and Gail Moore and I sat down and said, what we want to do is try to create a ranking system that allows for people to compare performances across many different terrains through different kinds of weather that can endure, a long distance race being valued as something similar to a sprint distance race, and making sure that we create something that's fairly simple. So with all those things in mind, we sought out something that was probably more simplified than what the goals of the program in 1993 actually were. Because what we essentially did is we had ratings, we had factors that we gave to certain events at certain levels. And so a national championship would be rated as a 97% event. And we had regional championships at 93%. We had state championships we had a few then at 90%. We had other events that we brought in, like St. Anthony's, like the Columbia, Maryland race with Robert Vigor used to do, and Wildflower. And those would be positioned inside and outside of those numbers, factors based on their relative field competitiveness. And so my job with about 450 sanctioned races at the time was to go in and I would study and analyze every single set of results. And I would, back then we had 14,000 members. So I knew many of the top 15, 20% of the athletes that were competing in the sport. So when I would see them compete in a Wildflower kind of race, it wasn't a national, state, or regional championship, the factor would go up and so on and so forth. So we did this for the period of time. The problem is there were shortcomings of that. And it was the factor system. And it was human judgment gauging whether the factors should be higher or lower is up to me and only me. And that wasn't a very good system for us. So when we went back, and Sam alluded to, and actually brought another team together to say, let's take a look at some other variables and create the algorithm that allows us to be a little bit more driven through process and not a person that evaluates a factor for an event. And we created what we created to, again, the goal of using as a means by which you can compare scores across events, disciplines, and the competition level that was actually there. It got very complex. It's now very complex for people to understand. It's hard for people to understand what you mean by pace setters and par times and some of those things. And so that's obviously the reason at the crux of why we're now having this discussion. I still believe this is a tool for people to use to compare races and score. But as we also know, it becomes a tool for those top athletes that look to try to hit All-American status, to have it also be a barometer by which they can measure themselves against others as well. And so this group needs to come together to say, what do we ultimately want to see this one to be? Is it a combination of, like it was then, or is it a little bit more participatory focused, where we're not going to worry about as much of the top end as we are the majority of the people that are doing the three races that are requisite for triathlon and the two for duathlon.
And then I think to your point, Tim, is kind of the question that was posed is, what is the purpose of the sport? Is it only to be competitive? So I think at this point, I know we're running short on time and I'll let Liz take over, but I feel everybody should just kind of look at the pros and cons of the system based on the explanations we have. I will send everybody information regarding how scores are calculated, how overall scores are calculated. But again, are we evolving as a sport, or are we kind of being stagnant and just rewarding accomplishment based on what? I think that's pretty much the biggest question is, where is the sport moving? Is it more recreational, or are we trying to be incredibly competitive only for a small margin of individuals?
And it may be both.
Yeah, and
it's both, because I think, again, we don't want to eliminate the All-American program, and we don't want to not be celebrating performance. I think that's really important. And again, it may be that the ranking system is two different, it's two different things. There's two different rankings that are coming in. It may be if you hit a certain number of events in a specific discipline, and we follow the Olympic concept, and it's bronze, silver, and gold, and you get those designations and you can move around in those, and we encourage people to try to get to those levels. And that's one way, that's one aspect of the ranking system. And the other is this more complex, let's be as fair as possible, let's do what we need to do to reward that performance. to go super, super simple, because we've heard, because I think we're gonna meet somewhere in the middle. And I hate to keep on talking about the Ironman system but it's so simple, right? The Ironman system, your points are calculated based on your finish time behind the first person in your age group on race day. And each event distance is assigned a certain number of points. Now, where that's problematic for us is it's only problematic for us if we're doing kind of like an overall, which I think we should. We should have like to use Dave's term, he likes the legend, do become an All-American or whatever in each one of the different disciplines. But if we can assign, in this instance, you assign a point total, and Ironman is 5,000 points. I'm racing against Nick. Nick wins the age group, he gets 5,000 points. I'm 2 minutes behind him. My points are 4,989. That they decay at a rate over the clock till you get to a point floor, at which point it doesn't get any lower, and that's what your points are. And there may be like that is extraordinarily simplistic, but it does accommodate field, strength of field, weather, conditions on race day, whatever. I mean, it does accommodate all those because it is race day focused. So I think when we start to look at what we could do, I really want you guys to leave today, think about this being a race day system, not with pace setters from 2 years ago, because we have that already. Let's look at conditions on race day, strength of field on race day, how that might work. And then Nick will present ahead of time what other ranking systems look like. And Rick, if you want to send through what you did with tennis and how that ranking system worked. And then I think, for our next meeting, let's all come prepared with some ideas. I think you guys are pretty clear on what our goals are. What we want to look at is these goals in conjunction with our 4 constituent groups. How does the ranking support our club community? How does the ranking support our coaches? How do the rankings support our race directors? And how do our rankings drive participation and membership? And those, I think, are the biggies. Unless you have anything, unless I didn't get them right, Tim. Dave?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is avoid that, and I know Liz mentioned that as well. We're gonna look at it from 2 prongs. We're gonna look at it from the prong of participation and then also competitiveness and making sure that it is the fair system, because we're not gonna completely dissolve that aspect of it. So rest assured, Dave, we're not gonna go that direction.
And I think the factoring would actually negatively impact our race director community. Because then we're getting into why is my race not this number of points.
Tier 2 or tier 3.
Yeah, we can't get into that, and I mean, every race is so important. A race that is all women that has like 50 participants in it, but gets 50 women into the sport shouldn't be factored less than an Ironman event in terms of their, its overall. I mean, granted the competition is different, but I do think, there's ways around it. So you can see, I mean, this is a really complex problem. It's not an easy solve. That's why we've brought the best minds together here on this that represent all of our different constituents. Give some thought over the next, and we should set a time. Is this a good time for everybody? Time of day? Christy, I know you're on the East Coast. Is this too late for you?
No. Mm-mm.
Let's set like let's set another meeting, and then let's really dive in, and maybe